I'm Amanda Walker, and right now on IMF Today, we're asking, how do economies build resilience? It's the question on everyone's minds after a global pandemic and a cost of living crisis. Nowhere is the question more important than in the emerging market countries of the G20. The Group of 20 is an international forum of the world's largest economies, and those emerging markets now account for a third of global GDP. What happens in those countries can impact the world around them.
This spillover can create winners and losers and reallocate capital and labor across countries and sectors.
So how do you secure growth amid risks of fragmentation and fragility? We're getting answers right now on IMF Today. The shocks of a pandemic, wars, and a cost of living crisis have rocked the world in the last several years. Now, in this fragile and fragmented time, emerging markets are playing a growing role in the global economy, in particular, the ones that are part of the G20. And that was the topic of one of the analytical chapters of the World Economic Outlook. Joining me now to discuss this is Carolina, who is Osorio-Buitron, a senior economist here at the IMF. Thank you so much for joining us, Carolina. So the WEO clearly points to the growing role of the G20 emerging markets in the global economy. Tell me, what are the main implications of this?
Thank you for having me. Well, in our chapter, we document that in the 20 years leading to the pandemic, developments in G20 emerging markets explain a larger share of economic fluctuations in other countries, more so than in the past. And actually, the so-called spillovers are now comparable to those from advanced economies. Take, for example, China. Spillovers from China have global implications, and like the US, they help explain over 10% of economic output changes in other emerging economies. Elsewhere, spillovers from G20 advanced and emerging economies have also become similar, with the latter having important regional implications.
So, given weakening growth prospects, which we've heard about so far this week, should we be worried about the implication of a slowdown in these emerging markets, given the impact they've had so far?
The short answer is yes. So imagine that G20 economies experience a broad-based decline in productivity, then output would decline less than proportionately, but more so than they did in the past, 3 times as much, and more so than if the slowdown occurred in the US. Now, it's possible that some sectors and countries could experience a boost from this, because over the longer term, this slowdown in productivity would create a reallocation of economic activity and jobs between sectors. Now, take, for example, a more specific case in which the slowdown in productivity is concentrated in sectors that are highly integrated into global supply chains. So in this case, it's possible that manufacturing activity abroad would receive a boost because competition from G20 emerging markets would decline. I think I should also mention that if China slows down, it's costly for the world economy. However, if the other G20 emerging markets were to grow at a faster rate, they would create positive spillovers, and they could lift growth by 0.5 percentage point in a rather realistic scenario.
So how do we preserve growth and build that key word, resilience?
So for policymakers in countries on the receiving end, it's important to maintain policy buffers. That is, tightening monetary and fiscal policies in good times to save for the bad times, and to also continue strengthening their policy frameworks. This will help them manage better shocks that come from the G20 emerging markets. And in cases where there are sectors that stand to benefit from the slowdown in G20 emerging markets, it would be important to consider structural reforms to support those sectors. The reason for doing this is that that would ensure that there's an efficient reallocation of resources towards there would be more needed. Now, to ensure that this transition is smooth, inclusive policies are also needed. Inclusive policies is something like targeted fiscal stimuli, which can help offset potential adverse effects on the income distribution when the reallocation of jobs across sectors takes place.
Carolina, thank you so much for your time. We're now turning to a country at the centre of the G20 emerging markets story. Brazil has long been a global juggernaut with worldwide reach in everything from commodities to aerospace. Brazil's economy rebounded strongly from the COVID-19 pandemic. And in 2023, its economy grew by 2.9%. Earlier today, I spoke with Brazil's central bank governor, Roberto Campos Neto, about how Brazil's domestic policies have helped the economy navigate global turbulence.
To understand the spillover, we have to go back a little bit and see what has happened lately. And I think we went from a huge effort towards the plans to face COVID. That meant a lot of fiscal expenditure and also meant a very big monetary effort for most of the central banks. What came out of that was an inflationary process that some thought was transitory. It proved not to be that transitory. And then we started to highlight the fact that it was very difficult to see after some time where the disinflation was going to come from, especially in the US, but in some other places too. And so we moved from low for longer, on a period of uncertainty, and now we are going to this period in which perhaps we're going to have higher interest for longer. And on the top of that, we have a much higher debt. And we still see the fiscal programs that are very expansionary. So I think the reality right now is we were going to go into a phase in which people will talk more about fiscal, and that will actually have an impact on emerging market countries. And the question is, how do you prepare for that? So Brazil is a country that has been a fiscal story for a long time. But also Brazil, and answering the second part of your question, is a country that has done a lot of the homework. So during the pandemic, very few countries did reforms. Brazil did a lot of reforms during the pandemic. Social security reform, we had the labor reform that was done before. We did a lot of reforms to remove bureaucracy. We're now talking about a fiscal reform, there is a tax reform, there is a new fiscal framework in place. So I think the way you prepare for it is you need to keep doing the reforms, and you need to do reforms that expand your ability to improve things on the supply side of the economy.
And fragmentation is a word we hear a lot in these halls. Tell me about the risk and the opportunities from friendshoring, nearshoring that Brazil faces.
Yeah, so we expected on the redoing of the supply chains, we expected to have a position of advantage because Brazil has a huge ability to produce clean energy. We have a huge labor force, and we also have a huge internal market. And it is the case today, if you are a company in Europe, some other places, that you can produce inputs in Brazil in a much cleaner way, so to speak. But the reality is, I think we've faced so many other challenges globally that when you look at the flow that is coming to Brazil, you do see a lot of flow going into producing food in a cleaner way, and Brazil has become a major producer of agricultural products globally. But when you look in terms of greenfield projects that are going to Brazil, we expect to see more from now on. We are still in a slow process. You see some of the greenfield projects going to Mexico and to Vietnam, which is concentrating a lot of the hub in Asia. But in the case of Brazil, we think we have much more potential than what we have got so far.
And when you look more outwardly at Brazil's role in the global economy, how do you see the spillovers from what's happening in your country with your policies, and how do they potentially affect the rest of us?
Well, the main spillover is always agriculture. Brazil has become a huge producer, for example, of soy. And so if you have a problem in the chain, and we almost had that because we could, for a while, we couldn't buy fertilizers. And I remember telling people, if you can't buy fertilizers, it means the soy price is going to increase globally by a lot. And so I think there was a strong spillover on the food production. And then we are very important in Latin America because Brazil is a big economy. We used to have a much more important relationship in terms of trade with Argentina. Now Argentina has become smaller. We want Argentina to go back into growing because that actually pushes the growth of Brazil.
Roberto, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate
Thank you very
it.
much.
Of course, resilience and growth don't just impact the Group of 20. They are on the minds of every country around the world. At these meetings, the IMF's 190 member countries have a new representative at the helm of the International Monetary and Financial Committee, better known as the IMFC. Mohammed Aljadaan is the Minister of Finance for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and this will be his first meetings as IMFC chair. I spoke to him earlier.
Thank you very much for having me, and it's really good to be here, and it's good to welcome the members into the spring meetings. Very exciting times, very challenging times. But I'll tell you a little bit about the Saudi experience. Saudi went through a significant transformation over the last 7 years under Vision 2030. And just before COVID, as we were really preparing for COVID, significant transformation. Digitalization, social transformation, government transformation that actually allowed us to weather COVID and the multiple shocks that came after COVID very well prepared. Structural changes, government efficiency, digitization, very strong financial system and financial buffers, very efficient spending that allowed the Saudi government to really rebound very quickly after COVID. And I think there is something to learn from this for other countries around the world. If you want to do the right thing, you need to do the right thing and be tough and bold in changing and transitioning, rather than doing them very slowly and sometimes even painfully.
So what are your priorities for this upcoming IMFC, and what do you hope to accomplish over the next 3 years of your tenure?
I will not look at the 3 years at this stage. I think it's too early. I'm talking to the members. Obviously, the key thing is to build on what Nadia have done, the ex-chair, and bringing a streamlined IMFC, focusing on the strategic issues. Resilience is key today, and I think countries will need to ensure that they prepare themselves for even future shocks. I mean, we have heard Kristalina talk in the key report that she issues about how the world economy is moving. We are obviously a lot better than what we thought we will be a year ago, but still challenges are underway, and we need to make sure that we are prepared, working together, supporting multilateral institutions, working collaboratively to face these common challenges for a better world.
And of course, there are headlines generated in these meetings. One of them is the World Economic Outlook. Things are flat, basically. Does that change when you land here in DC? Does it change any of your thoughts about your upcoming tenure and the role of the IMFC?
I think a few things that we need to really deal with. One is, obviously, the world today is a better world than what we thought it would be a year ago or 2 years ago. Okay, so we have a reasonably good landing on the world economy. Obviously, the growth potential is challenging, not as it was a decade or 2 decades ago, but that is what is important for these meetings, is to sit down with the members, discuss challenges, discuss opportunities of how can we work together collaboratively to make sure that we deal with these challenges together. Without it, it is very difficult. Working alone is very difficult. So it's really that multilateral discussion that will hopefully help the world economy recover and recover better and grow even better.
Minister, thank you for joining us on IMF today.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
And the IMFC convenes for the first time at these meetings tomorrow afternoon. This afternoon, we will hear from Nigeria in our latest Governor Talk. Then we have the 2 sessions of the New Economy Forum. Then tomorrow morning, it's the Managing Director's press briefing, as well as the first of our 2 regional economic outlooks. There's also a panel on promoting sustainable, inclusive growth and gender equality. And tomorrow afternoon, it's the global debate with the managing director. The topic, AI and the future of growth and prosperity. And that's what we'll be talking about here on IMF Today as well. Now let's leave you once again with some of the best images of these meetings in the last 24 hours. See you tomorrow.